Hello, everyone. I'm Lily. I am the Black Currant and Elderberry breeder at the Savannah Institute, and I'm the host of this session. And I will let y'all take it away. And I will pin whoever's talking first.
I think that's me. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Lily. I appreciate that. My name is Robin Suggs. I'm with the Appalachian Sustainable Development Herb Hub, the procurement manager. We're located in Duffield, Virginia. I'll tell you a little bit about my position and the Herb Hub momentarily. But first, I'm going to mention a little bit about what I'm going to cover today and tell you a little bit about my background and sort of how I got here and my experience forest farming and working with wild native botanicals. Um, and we're going to talk a little bit about some business considerations. I'm assuming that probably we have folks in the audience from all different backgrounds and all different, lots of different reasons that y'all are here today. Some folks, maybe want to start a business. Some are just getting their feet wet and trying to figure out what to do with forest farming. We're going to talk a little bit about markets and marketing. We'll talk a little bit about crop selection, site considerations, production methodology, and most importantly, I want to encourage y'all to be thinking of some questions that are relevant to your particular situation, since y'all are probably scattered all over the country. So I opted not to do a slide presentation today, so I'm going to torture you with my face. And the reason for that is I'm going to give you sort of a 30,000 foot view of what forest farming looks like and talk mostly about principles, practices, and some considerations and things you need to ask yourself when you're making this journey into forest farming. So a little bit more about me and my position here with Appalachian Sustainable Development. Again, I'm procurement manager at the Herb Hub, which is located in Duffield, Virginia. The Herb Hub is, for lack of a better description, it's really a shared use facility where we help folks that are producing both forest farmed and field grown herbs and botanicals, help them market their material. We provide a space for them to process, dry, clean, package, and then we do the shipping and billing for them. Basically, just help folks in the region connect to national and international markets. Primarily, at the moment, we ship across the U.S. We have some customers in Canada, and just work with a lot of folks like yourselves, or like probably a lot of you are in the audience, to try to help you move your product and, more importantly, make more money and help you become more profitable. So I'll talk a little bit about, hopefully a whole lot about how you can move forward into some of the things you need to think about to get involved in forest farming profitably. First of all, I should probably go into a little bit of an explanation, a little bit of detail of what forest farming is. And in my view, it's a pretty broad subject. Anytime that you are producing a crop for profit or for pleasure in a forested setting intentionally, or you're managing wild crops in a forested setting intentionally, that's sort of my broad overview of what forest farming is. And we'll talk about intensity of cultivation, intensity of management in a little bit, and talk a little bit about different production systems. But basically, forest farming is you're growing things under the naturally occurring or a intentionally planted canopy of trees. And in my neck of the woods, where I practiced forest farming in the past in Western North Carolina, it's a pretty biodiverse landscape. So there's a lot of species that make up the forest canopy, the understory, the shrubs and subshrubs and herbaceous layer of the forest. So a lot of times you're managing multiple species on any given parcel of land. My background and how I got here is, I think it was back in 2004, I started a small herb company in Western North Carolina called Moonbrash Botanicals. And it was sort of a labor of necessity. I found myself in a very remote county in the Smokies, very high unemployment rate, very high poverty rate. I had resigned a job because I was tired of traveling every day from a remote area into the city. And so I'm like, well, what can I do here to make a living? I have 32 acres, and my background was in ornamental horticulture. So I knew I didn't have a lot of startup capital to get involved in traditional horticulture. I really didn't want to go to the bank and borrow money. So I'm like, well, I've got all these native perennials and shrubs and trees that I have here on the property. How can I manage those profitably, sustainably, so that I can support myself? So I started my company, Moon Branch Botanicals, and I did things probably, in hindsight, probably a little backwards from what a lot of folks do. A lot of folks decide they want to get in forest farming or agriculture in general, and they're like, "Hey, I like growing lavender." For instance, I know that's typically not a forest farm crop, but we use lavender as an example because it's very popular right now with a lot of folks. And they're like, well, I'm good at growing lavender. I like lavender. I like the smell of it. My family members like it. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to plant lavender. And then I'm going to find a market for lavender. And that's probably the exact opposite way that you need to approach this thing. What I did is I had an idea about the types of crops that were already growing or in and around my property that I could sustainably manage and produce a product with. So I'm like, well, who am I going to sell this to? I'm thinking I'm going to sell bulk botanicals to practicing herbalists and herb processors, people that make tinctures and teas and salves and various herbal preparations on any scale that I can get in the door with. So I went to Asheville, North Carolina, which is sort of our closest population center. And I asked a couple of herbalist friends of mine, I'm like, look, this is my idea. What do you think I should do? And they said, well, one of them in particular told me, she said, I've got a friend that's going to be the health and body care manager at a new grocery store in Asheville. It's now a Whole Foods. It originally started out as Green Life Grocery. And she's like, you need to go and talk to the HBC manager, tell her what you want to produce, and ask her if she's interested in buying things from you. So that's what I did. I made an appointment with the HBC manager there at Green Life Grocery, and I said, introduced myself, and I said, I've got 32 acres. I want to produce native forest botanicals, medicinal herbs, herbs that are typically used in making medicines. And is that something that you're interested in, a local source of forest botanicals? And she said, yeah, I'd be very interested. And I'm like, great, what do I need to do to get your business? And she's like, well, what I want these herbs dried until they're shelf stable. I want them clean. I want them minimally processed. I don't want them ground up. I want them small enough particles to where you can put them and measure them in and out of a 32-ounce straight-sided glass jar. But I want the particles big enough to where you can see what you're buying. I want a label that stands out, that's different from, say, the Frontier or Mountain Rose label that I have on the shelf. And I'm like, okay, great. I'll be happy to do that. She's like, when can you get it to me? I'm like, give me 2 weeks. So I went back home, ordered some 32-ounce straight-sided glass jars, got a label program, developed some labels with some photography that I had done. And in 2 weeks, I brought her a sample product, and she said, great. How many of these, how many different products do you have, and how many different species can I get? And I said, well, I can probably have you a dozen or so products by the end of the month. And she goes, great. So that's where it started. I identified my market first. And so that's really an important lesson for folks that are getting involved in forest farming is, a lot of folks, if you've got some land or you have access to forest land and you don't know what you want to grow, or maybe you have an idea what you want to grow, it might be good to do your research to find out what folks need, because what seems like a great idea for you may not pay the bills for you. Now, if you're doing it as a hobby, that's wonderful. If you're doing it to encourage the biodiversity on your property, that's wonderful. But these are the types of considerations that you need to be thinking about when you're starting a business. And while we're talking, or while I'm talking here today, I'd like for y'all to be thinking about things that are maybe specific to your neck of the woods and where you live and where you're a practitioner. what your situation is, what's unique to you. So I'm happy to answer any questions regarding those particulars as best I can based on my experience in the eastern hardwood forest. But one of the things that you'll probably need to ask yourself first is, what do you want to accomplish by forest farming? Is this are you trying to create a little part-time income, something that maybe pay your property tax, maybe put your kids through school if you have kids, or actually putting your kids through school, that would probably require more than part-time income. That would require pretty substantial part-time income. But I think you know where I'm going with this. You got to figure out what exactly your needs from your production are going to be. You want to replace a job. You want to come home. You want to do this because you like planting things and you want to enhance the biodiversity of your woods. You got to figure out exactly why you want to forest farming. And so once you determine that, that'll help determine your scale of production and how much you need to sell, what type of processing equipment, if any, you're going to need. Because if you're going to get material to market, you're going to have to figure out, well, how am I going to keep it shelf stable or in a fresh state in order to get it to market? You need to figure out, am I going to be selling dried herbs? Am I going to be selling tree barks? Am I going to be selling fresh material to local herb processors? Do I have access to internet? Am I able to take and process credit card payments? How am I going to ship material? How am I going to get material to local markets? If you're servicing a farmer's market with forest farm material, that's something I've never done because of where I live is pretty remote, and our farmer's market, quite honestly, is very very limited in what they offer and the clientele. So I probably wouldn't have done very well trying to make much money at the local farmers market. But if you're in an area that has a really big farmers market and you've got a huge herbal clientele there locally, that might be a source of clientele for you. But these are the sort of things that you need to think about when you're developing your business and hopefully a business plan in some form or fashion. You want to think about how you're going to reach markets. Are you going to start a website? Are you going to sell on Etsy? Are you going to sell? There was a really great website years ago, Local Harvest, where they had a web store. They don't have their web store anymore, but actually sold quite a few products like pawpaws and ground nuts and those sort of things on the Local Harvest website. And for some reason, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, they shut that website down, and now they just do CSAs. And the website is still up, but they don't have a web store anymore. But if there's an opportunity for you to tap into a local shared use web store, if those things are available in your region, that's great. Just you got to think about who you're going to be selling to and how you're going to reach them. Then you need to think about, well, what types of crops are in demand? What types of crops can I grow? What am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? I could go on and on and on about the crops that I dealt with in the Eastern US under the canopy of a mostly Eastern hardwood forest at about 2,000 foot elevation, between 2,000 and 4,000 feet when you encompass some of the areas that I worked in. So we were talking about things like American ginseng, golden seal, black cohosh, ramps, which is a culinary and edible, slippery elm bark, witch hazel bark, witch hazel leaves, those types of things that all have a market either in the culinary and restaurant industry or in the medicinal plants industry. And those were things that grew already close to where I live. So I knew they were well adapted. If you as you're selecting your crops, you're probably going to want to. I dealt with exclusively natives because that was sort of a passion of mine, and I'm fortunate living in a part of the country where a lot of our native plants are in demand as medicinal herbs and botanical products. I knew some folks that were doing Chinese medicinals because the climate in central and eastern China is very similar to that of the eastern U.S. I chose not to do that. If you do non-native material, you might want to take into consideration the possibility that you're introducing a potential pest. Like where I live, kudzu was a plant that was introduced back during the Depression by the USDA as a tool to prevent erosion, and it's escaped and become a major nuisance throughout a lot of the country. But it's also medicinal. So actually, kudzu is one of those plants that I would dig up from where it was a pest and I would sell. But are you going to create a pest problem? Are you introducing a new exotic invasive? You want to think about that sort of thing. But again, I chose natives because I knew they were well adapted to my region. I was blessed to have a good eastern hardwood forest with deep loamy soils that didn't require a whole lot of preparation. So basically, my production systems mimic a natural forest, a biodiverse working forest. And basically, I utilize the species that were already occurring there or the ones that occurred in locales close to where I live, usually within 15, 20 miles. I could bring them in, propagate them, move them out, expand populations, work with existing populations, that sort of thing.
1 minute, Robin.
I'm sorry?
1 minute.
Okay. Thank you for the heads up. That brings us to the next consideration, which is your site. Once you figure out what you want to grow, do you have a site that is conducive to growing the types of things that you need to or want to grow for your market? Again, my production system, I was looking at growing things that were native in a biodiverse habitat under the forest that was occurring on my property. So, and a lot of these species are already occurring there. So I knew I had a site that was conducive for growing a lot of the species that I wanted to produce. So if you have a site that's less than ideal, if you need to plant trees or if you need to provide cover, if you need to amend the soil, just keep in mind that the more you get away from the ideal conditions that a plant's adapted to growing in or needs to be grown in to prosper, the more it's going to cost you, the more soil amendments you're going to have to bring in, the more labor you're going to have to provide, the more site management you're going to have to provide. Just your cost of production goes up. So I was very interested in keeping my cost of production down. Again, my production methods, I was actually developed a production system called woods culture, which was basically ended up embellishing, enhancing, and stewarding a natural forest for intentional production of medicinal herbs. I started out doing a little tilling and soil prep. I found out quickly that some of the trees suffered, my tractor suffered, my health suffered, because working in the woods with the tractor equipment can be a little problematic at times. So I tried to keep the amount of invasive site prep down to a minimum. So anyway, I know we had a minute left about a minute ago, so I'm going to wrap this up. But I really want to encourage y'all to think about some of the overlying principles that I talked about and how they might come into play with your particular situation. And I know that we're going to have an open forum at the end of these discussions or at the end of these presentations. So just encourage you to give some thought to some of the issues that I brought up. And so I'm going to turn this back to the moderator. Thank y'all for listening.
Thank you so much, Robin. I love the idea of working directly with the people who will be selling products to create a product specifically that they want. That's a great insight. Next up, we'll have Karam. And I will spotlight you, and you can share your slides.
Awesome. All right.
Actually, Karam was going to do the last session because he's kind of wrapping it up. I'm kind of the middle one with the farm, if you don't mind. Or do you want me to go?
I don't mind.
I just knew that you had kind of sort of the more overarching thing. So,
hey, that's great with me. If you want to go, Ingrid, go for it.
Great.
Okay.
We'll have Ingrid go.
All right. Let's see if I can get my screen to share here. Okay, let's see. Can you see that? Okay.
I can see it. Absolutely. Just needs to be in presenter mode or presentation.
There you go. Okay. So my farm, Misty Dawn Farm, we're a small scale agroforestry farm, and we produce specialty log grown mushrooms and provide demonstrations that serve southern Wisconsin's urban community, where people can learn techniques and experience forest farming practices, food sovereignty, and connect with nature. So this is an aerial of my farm. It's a 19-acre farm that was a farm field about 50 years ago. And the people who planted the sugar maple, which you can kind of see is that whole section of trees that are basically looking like a checkerboard. They planted a grid of sugar maple, 4,000 trees initially, and there's about 3,500 trees left. You can see there's some areas where the trees have senesced. And then on the left is the homestead and an orchard. So I've been working on reconstituting the farm. It was vacant for about 10 years. So it needs a lot of work. I shouldn't say it needed it. It still needs quite a bit of work. But today we're going to focus primarily on the shiitake mushrooms. But I did want to kind of tell you just this overview of the farm. So I've got log-grown specialty mushrooms. I've got my sugar maple plantation for maple syrup production. I have that orchard with fruit, nuts, and berries. I do have some wild shade-grown herbals. Right now, ginseng, but hopefully down the road, I'll be planting more diversity into the understory. I have working animals that provide honey, fiber, and basically soil fertility, because I use a lot of their manure for fertilizing. And also for IPM. And agrotourism is another commodity. That actually is probably my biggest moneymaker at this point in time on the farm. And then, of course, I do a lot of conservation and stewardship on the farm as well. And this is sort of the 5-year game plan for how I'm going to be interspersing all of these different products in my farm. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that's where the log-grown shiitake mushrooms are. There was a pine plantation in that area, which I chose to use because it protects the shiitake logs from wind and a lot of other contamination. And then there's areas where I'm hoping to do hazelnut and elderberry and other things like that. So it's a very integrated regenerative farm that I will work. I have a 5-year vision for it. Nothing happens quickly in agroforestry, and it's hard to get production and products quickly. So that's my caveat for what we're going to be talking about here today. So about shiitake mushrooms and mushrooms in general, I am the president of the Growers Association, so I'm always trying to encourage people to think about growing mushrooms. And if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the projected growth of the markets for shiitake mushrooms. And they're projecting annually about an 8.7% growth in demand. And then on the right, do you see kind of the pie chart? And, pretty much Asia is still the biggest consumer of mushrooms. Europe follows that. Central and South America follow that. And then we're sort of next in North America. And then even, you can even see that little less than 1% of the Middle East. They have one particular mushroom called the desert truffle that falls into that. So there's mushrooms everywhere in the world. But those areas that have, bigger mushroom production, of course, have the bigger part of the pie chart. When we talk about consumers, one of the things that when we did a market analysis, we looked at the fact that we had young educated, urban to semi-urban, upwardly mobile families. In the old days, it was called the soccer mom, that were health conscious, wanted to feed good food to their families. They had strong environmental concerns. Also, people who are foodies and vegans, microphiles, which are people who love mushrooms. And then there's a whole new niche for medical needs for mushrooms. Mushrooms are a wonderful medicinal, and in Asia, they're used extensively. Reishi mushroom is considered and is known as the mushroom of immortality. But all mushrooms have medicinal properties because basically we as human beings, our DNA is about 65% similar to mushrooms. And so we really can incorporate the elements of mushrooms into our bodies more readily. There are a few things to consider about ingesting mushrooms. Mushrooms should be cooked. They have a element in them called chitin, which is basically the shell of a shrimp, and that makes it harder to digest. So to actually get more of the nutritional value of a mushroom, you need to cook it. And also, one of the fun facts that I found out is that the button mushroom, which are eaten raw on salad bars, have a element in it that is rocket fuel, basically the same thing. And so when you eat a raw mushroom, you're ingesting carcinogens. So if you're eating the raw button mushrooms, so it's really important that your food is cooked. So that's just an aside. So, and then here, talking about the white button mushroom is 73% of our consumption. And then each of the other mushrooms, goes down from there. Oysters, 16, and then all other specialty mushrooms are only 1%, and Shiitake falls within that 1%. But you can see in the other graph that we have a huge, explosion in the demand. And there's so many varieties of mushrooms. I mean, I get a lot of people who say, "Oh, I don't like mushrooms," and I tell people, I said, "Well, you're comparing." If you say you don't like fruit, it's like apples, oranges, pears, bananas. They all have different flavors. They all have different, textures. And so to just lump everything with those awful canned button mushrooms that you got as a child is not fair. So there's a little bit of marketing that we do when it comes to encouraging people to eat mushrooms, to try different mushrooms, having cards and other things like that is really, especially if you do farmers markets. I used to do a lot of farmers markets, and I spent most of my time educating, not so much selling, mostly educating at the farmers markets. So here's the process. So basically we are, a log grower. And so we get our logs in the winter time. We cut them when they're dormant, and then we let them cure for a season, about 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on the species of log that we're cutting. And then we drill holes in them, we inoculate with spawn, and then we cover them with wax. And then we let them sit for 12 to 18 months. So it's not a quick process. The ones that you mostly get in the grocery store are sawdust block grown, and I call those my couch potato mushrooms, versus the bodybuilder mushrooms that we are using here, which are the log grown. They're grown outdoors. They have to break down the cellulose. They have to deal with the elements. And they take about 12 to 18 months to produce. On the bottom left, you can see that we're starting to show the mycelium production in the log. And I basically say that we're mycelium farmers, not mushroom farmers, because we're actually protecting the mycelium in the logs. The tank in the middle, if we're doing force fruiting, and then you can see there we're putting them in the uprights, and that makes it nice for harvesting. And then on the left, I can't see the picture, but it's, the production here. So, and then there's a lot of different, reasons for the log grown versus the indoor grown or the overseas production. But one of the things that's important to consider is the idea of when you're going to a wholesale, like to a grocery store, you're competing against indoor commercial grown, and they'll sell for about $4 or $5 to a wholesaler. Whereas a log grown, I usually are, selling for $10 at as a wholesale price. So you have to consider who your markets are going to be and how you're going to promote the log grown versus the indoor grown. So you have to think about your competition. But it's a very different mushroom, and so that's where the whole idea of growing these is important. And I won't go into all the details, but you'll have a copy of that in your files. So some ideas as far as the products, you can sell them as fresh, dried cap, powdered. I when I dry them, I do the powdered stems. I do herbal blends. I also sell the inoculated logs to gardeners or hobbyists. I do inoculation events where somebody comes for 3 hours. They help me inoculate a bunch of logs, and then they take a log home. And then I do a lot of speaking and mentoring as well. So here is my sugar maple plantation. And as you can see, it's, perfect rows. It's not a normal wood area. But what I do here is I will be pruning these trees because they do need some pruning. And then from those, because this is sugar maple instead of oak, I will be growing lion's mane. So thinking about the wood lots that you have and, the type of access to the wood that you have will determine what types of mushrooms you will like to grow. There's a lot of challenges to growing indoor or outdoor shiitake mushrooms. It's labor intensive. You do need to have, some help. I'm 64 years old. I'm retired. And, I definitely need to put out there that, I need somebody to help haul logs, things like that. Do you have partners? There's a longer timeline of investment. You have to protect the logs from damage or contamination. If your logs become contaminated, they don't last as long, and you have to use them basically as firewood. So when you have a log, it lasts between a softwood would last 2 to 5 years, and a hardwood would last 5 to 7, even 10 years in production mode. So you do have to take care of those logs, and then water them if you have a drought condition. You have to think about the investment needs of infrastructure, processing, storage. Do you have a kitchen that you can process your mushrooms in? Currently, there's not enough product to meet the demand. And then, you have your distribution channels. So for me, I sell primarily direct to caterers and to restaurants and to people who contact me and want to buy my mushrooms directly. I don't do a lot of farmers markets anymore. And then you have to think about climate change and droughts and how that impacts your logs. You also have to think about, the sources of your wood. Do you have somebody, do you have a woodlot that you can harvest, or do you have a need for to purchase? Do you have good transportation routes to markets and market visibility? Do you have a track record for producing high quality mushrooms, and your networks and education and mentoring? So like for me, I'm very fortunate. I live in Janesville, so I have, within an hour and a half, I have Milwaukee, Chicago, Rockford, Madison, and actually Dubuque. So I have a very large population center, which where people can come to me, or I can send things to them. One of the things I wanted to, and you'll have to let me know how much time I have left, but since we're talking about the things that you don't think about, is, how to create sort of your networks. And this is why I wanted Karam to go after me, because, he'll be talking a lot about the networks. As a farmer, you don't always know who to reach out to. And sometimes, like from my perspective, I didn't reach out to FSA until I put in my pad for my processing building. And then when I went to them and I said, I need money to build the building, they said, well, you already put your pad in. You should have come to us before you put your pad in, because now it's a capital investment and not a working capital investment. So trying to figure out who to talk to, who to reach out to, and make sure that you have all of your ducks in the proper line is really important. So like from here, I've got NRCS, equip dollars, FSA for working loans, SARE for research. I just applied for a SARE research grant, and I also had another research grant a few years ago on how to use red maple for shiitake. You've got state partners, like for us in Wisconsin, we have DADCAP, and they provide grants, but they also provide the Farm Center, which is free assistance and can help you with working on your budgets and things like that. The DNR, I just got a Wiffle Gap grant, which helps to with my pruning and with my forest management to improve my forests. And then there's a whole lot of local support, foundations and then specific organizations like the Savannah Institute. So there's a lot of help out there, and knowing who to ask or how to connect with those different organizations is really key to helping you. Like just recently, I'm talking to Alliant Energy. So your local energy has grant funding for if you need to upgrade different like electrical systems and things like that. So there's a lot of money and there's a lot of support out there. The Food Finance Institute
Ingrid, you got 1 minute, by the way.
Yeah, I'm almost done. Thanks. The Food Finance Institute can help with business plans, and your specialty, your Small Business Development Center too, is really good for doing the business plans. So, and then last, I wanted to just share the Shiitake Growers Association. They are out there. We mentor new growers. We have equipment you can borrow from us. There's videos for talking to loggers and to teach loggers how to log properly so you get good quality logs. So that organization is out there to help beginning growers and to also hold your hand and mentor you. And that's it. So there's my contact information. If you need more information, feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. That's so cool. And what a diversified income stream you have in terms of bringing people onto the farm to help you. And yeah, very, very interesting and practical. Thank you so much. So we'll hand it over to Karam to finish off our 15-minute presentations, and then we'll have lots of time for questions.
All right. Awesome. See if I can take it. All right. Is that working?
I can see it. Yes. You're good.
Yep. You can see it? Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Let's see if I can do this in 15 minutes. That's the goal. So, hey, my name is Karam Sheban, and I am the director of the Northeast Forest Farmers Coalition. So following up on those two awesome presentations, I'm going to start by kind of going up to the mile-high view of forest farming to talk a little bit about how the practice has grown in recognition, the past few decades. And then I'm going to come down to the half-mile high view and share a little bit about the project that I'm currently working on, which is helping to establish a forest farmers coalition in the Northeast. And this is actually all part of a PhD that I'm working on right now at the Yale School of the Environment. And I'll explain a little bit about how they kind of fit in together later in the presentation. And then I think we'll open it up for questions for everybody. So I'll try and leave time for that. But I wanted to start by just kind of giving like a really rough historical timeline for thinking about the practice of forest farming and how it's kind of gone from grassroots to gaining increasing recognition in the US, because this is starting to change really rapidly. So, the idea of forest farming, right, it all starts with people using non-timber forest products. People have been cultivating and harvesting useful products from forests since the beginning of time. And in North America, I've heard forests described as, historically our grocery store, our medicine cabinet. And from the beginning, part of using non-timber forest products was good stewardship, right? Ensuring that there are more plants to use next year. So whether this is sustainably tapping maple trees for sap or leaving behind like the largest, most reproductive ginseng plant to repopulate an area after a harvest, stewardship practices were part of this use of non-timber forest products and passed down intergenerationally, part of many cultures that relied on non-timber forest products in different ways. So non-timber forest product use and stewardship is something that it's persisted over time, and particularly in the Appalachian region, but across the country in communities that pass these practices down. So as a reflection of this, in the late 1980s and 1990s, you started to see community action organizations like Rural Action, pictured here. I worked here for 5 years in Southeast Ohio, but organizations like Appalachian Sustainable Development, where Robin works, organizations like this recognizing the value of these practices and taking up forest farming as a way to preserve these traditions and use them to support forest-based economies and forest ecosystems at the same time. During that same era, in the 1980s and the early 1990s, this new term, which actually originated in the tropical regions of the world, starts to catch on: agroforestry. Maybe some of you have heard of it. That might be why you're at this conference. And agroforestry, it's intentionally combining the principles of forestry and agriculture, and it can describe a bunch of different practices, like you can see pictured here in this National Agroforestry Center figure. So we get a National Agroforestry Center in 1992. That's when it was founded. And they basically say, okay, you know what? Intentionally planting and stewarding non-timber forest products, that's a type of agroforestry. We're going to call it forest farming. And that was a really big step forward in the history and the practice of forest farming being officially recognized in the US. And once forest farming gets kind of officially adopted into this new framework of agroforestry, you get scientists becoming increasingly interested in the practice. And so we start to see an explosion of interest in quantifying the benefits of agroforestry systems, including forest farming: carbon sequestration, water quality improvement, soil retention, increasing biodiversity, just to name a few of those benefits. So, as the world is becoming more concerned with CO2 emissions, the effects of climate change, all of these efforts to quantify the benefits of agroforestry lead to practices like forest farming and silvopasture being included in major international strategic frameworks to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So these are figures from Project Drawdown. This came out first in 2017 and essentially pulled together all of the top science-based climate strategies that could be implemented across the globe. And agroforestry practices are making this list near the top, actually. You can see silvopasture, multi-strata agroforestry. So yeah, that's talk about recognition. And all of this attention has meant that, when the Biden administration passed big legislation last year, the Inflation Reduction Act, with the goal of fighting climate change, agroforestry is one of the top practices that they're highlighting as a climate smart agriculture and forestry practice that's funded through this bill to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So people have been talking a lot about this funding at the conference so far because it's such a big departure from the funding landscape for agroforestry from past years. So the point I'm trying to make with all this is that we've seen forest farming and agroforestry in general getting increasing recognition. And we're also seeing that recognition translate back into more resources for forest farmers at the community level, micro grants, better access to planting stock, technical assistance, the shared use processing facilities like what they're doing at ASD. So it's really exciting. And a big part of the reason that those resources are making it back down to communities across the country is the result of organizations like those on the left and increasingly regional forest farming initiatives pulling those organizations together and funneling money into forest farming efforts onto farms across the country. So this is where I want to just zoom in onto the project that I'm currently working on, which is to build a forest farmers coalition in the Northeast United States. So when it came to developing the structure of the Northeast Forest Farmers Coalition, or the NFFC, it wasn't something that we came up with out of thin air. We're working from a model that I was familiar with from Appalachia, working with Robin and others. I grew up and went to college in Ohio. And when I graduated, started working at a nonprofit in Appalachian, Ohio called Rural Action. I showed you the picture of our office earlier. And that organization had been doing forest farming education and outreach since the early 1990s as a form of place-based economic development and also cultural revitalization, building a model of sustainability around multi-generational traditions of harvesting and stewarding understory plants. So I started at Rural Action in 2015, which is the same year that an initiative called the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers Coalition was founded by John Munsell, who's a professor of forestry at Virginia Tech University. And the model of the Appalachian Coalition was to unite a bunch of grassroots organizations across the Appalachian region that had been doing forest farming work in their communities under like a single unified banner, providing funding, sharing resources, and giving members across the region kind of this shared sense of an identity. And this model was like, it's just really effective. Some of the best conferences and events that we put on at Rural Action happened through the funding that was brought in through the coalition. And these pictures here are from events that were hosted through the ABFFC, and that we put on at Rural Action. So when I moved to the Northeast for graduate school, I kind of had this model in mind and had seen how effective that it could be. So two things that we found when we started exploring the forest farming landscape in the Northeast. The first is that it was a lot less organized. There weren't the Rural Actions or the Virginia Techs providing assistance. And the second was that forest landowners were just as interested in the practice of forest farming as they are in Appalachia. We pulled together a survey, and this is just a snapshot of quotes from forest landowners in the Northeast describing their interest in forest farming. And I can also say from organizing conferences and events in Ohio that we had people driving out to our events from Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine. So there was obviously interest, coming from the Northeast region. And I don't want to belabor this point, but the practice is also a great fit for the Northeast. You've got high levels of private land ownership, forest cover, lots of small-scale agriculture, and institutional infrastructure for supporting small farms and forests. And we're in the native range for the vast majority of the same species being cultivated in Appalachia, some of the understory species with the biggest markets. So those are kind of the pieces of inspiration that led us to start the Northeast Forest Farmers Coalition. And I had actually done master's research at Yale with Marlise Duguid, who's a faculty member there, on a large ginseng farm in the Catskills of New York. And so kind of building on that momentum, we applied for a USDA SARE grant, Sustainable Agriculture, Research, and Education, to start the NFFC. And so that was funded in 2021, and then we off to the races after that. And the model was largely based on the approach taken by Virginia Tech, trying to bring together a group of universities, nonprofits, working farms to begin to build a supportive community around forest farming in the Northeast. So we built out a website, we're on social media, we publish a newsletter. But the first thing that we did after receiving the funding was to establish a network of research and demonstration sites across the Northeast region. And this is just a map kind of showing that. We chose a network of different university and nonprofit-owned forests based on suitability for forest farming, but also accessibility for hosting tours and events at those sites. And as you can see, it's a pretty wide geographic range for where these demonstration sites are located. And here's what they look like on the ground, with some pictures of us planting out the sites. The guy in the orange vest is my PhD advisor, Mark Bradford, making us look official with his clipboard, helping us kind of hone in our research design with these sites. And one thing I wanted to share is that in the process of applying for funding to start this project, we surveyed growers across Appalachia and the Northeast and designed our research to answer the top questions that forest farmers had about planning a forest farming operation. So I don't want to stay on this slide for long because it's kind of a lot, but this is essentially our research design. And I just kind of wanted to show that each of those sites that we planted across the region have a replicated planting design where we planted 5 different understory species, both from seed and then transplanting in small roots in rows. And then we prepped and managed alternating rows to reflect a wild simulated approach to growing, and then a sort of more intensively managed approach where we added soil amendment, we till up the soil around the plants. And essentially the primary question of these, the primary research question is, how does planting stock type, so seed versus rootlet, and management approach, wild simulated versus more intensive management, affect the survival, establishment, and then the growth over time of these different species. So the other major component of the NFFC kind of project is education. And I mentioned our sites were chosen for their research and demonstration potential. We've also used those sites to host forest farming events where we talk about things like selecting an appropriate site, plant identification, population management, and other things. And so over the past 2.5 years, we presented at conferences. We've used grant funds to pay partner farms to lead forest farming workshops. So in the top left, those are our partners, Anna and Justin at Wild Hudson Valley in the Catskills, leading an event, their forest farm, funded through the NFFC. So our educational goals have been to create, these useful demonstration sites where we can host events ourselves, and that's the picture on the right. That's at one of our sites, but also to build a more decentralized model where we're actually paying forest farmers to share their expertise on their own farms. And that's something that, is a big part of the work that we did at Rural Action, and that happens throughout the Appalachian Forest Farmers Coalition, is to build a community of forest farmers across the region, and then also pay people for the work that they do. The other piece that's part of the NFFC is a mentorship program, where we're pairing beginning forest farmers with more experienced forest farmers to help people sort of take their operations to the next level. We've got about 50 people participating in that, and that's been a really awesome part of the work as well. So what's been really cool to see is that this project has become part of a growing body of forest farming work in the Northeast region. That's connecting farmers with faculty members and students at universities, setting up research. So here are some numbers that are primarily from the NFFC work, but I'm also including my SARE-funded master's research, and then an upcoming USDA forest farming grant that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But, the $500,000 brought into the region to support forest farming. We've planted 6 research and demonstration sites and put 15,000 plants in the ground, hosted multiple events over a couple years, for hundreds of people, and are beginning to reach not just forest farmers, but also technical service providers, like folks like foresters and NRCS agents, who hold the key to things like funding for aspiring forest farmers. So that's a big one. And yeah, I've slowly kind of seen the reach of the network growing. And we're also getting students involved with research, and kind of getting their hands dirty too. And so that's really huge too. It's sort of creating a pipeline of expertise in the region. And we've published some research and have a few more kind of peer-reviewed publications in the pipeline. So that's also, a piece of this people are talking about at the conference. And so, yeah, the main thing I wanted to just highlight with this is that, you start something and then it can grow. And it's been really cool to see that beginning to happen in the region. So that's kind of a snapshot of how the NFFC got started and what we've been up to. And I wanted to just quickly share a bit about what's next for us. And I mentioned that we recently received a second round of USDA funding. And here's some pictures of it's my colleague Walker and I setting up field research trials for this project, which is really geared towards solving the planting stock shortage problem, it's a bigger problem than just forest farming in the Northeast. It's an agroforestry problem. As agroforestry has grown in popularity, I think a lot of people are realizing that a huge barrier to wider adoption is a lack of readily available, locally sourced planting stock. So currently, if you're in the Northeast and you want to start forest farming, your best bet is to buy plant material from either a large-scale forest farm in Appalachia, but more likely a large commercial nursery. And a lot of those are located actually on the West Coast. And that obviously, creates issues around sustainability, but it also presents an opportunity for us to do this locally. So for this new project, we're setting up field trials, which you can see here, to determine the best on-farm growing environments for a range of different understory species. And then we're also working toward building a network of micro nurseries on farms across the region. And
you
we're
got
doing
1
that
minute.
direct. 1 minute. All right, I'm close. This is an exciting project, and we're really hoping to kind of build out a foundation of nurseries that can provide planting stock in the Northeast. And I'll go quickly. Another exciting thing that's upcoming is, we're moving toward, under the leadership of the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers Coalition, an American Forest Farming Association that would be more like a national body. And I don't want to say too much more about that because it's developing, but that's exciting. And we're also just generally seeing a lot more organizations kind of getting involved in offering forest farming assistance. So again, just speaking to the momentum that we're starting to see and that this conference is really highlighting is some big changes. And then, not to end on a downer slide, but we're also seeing that there are barriers to getting this work done and seeing broader adoption across the region. And I don't need to go into this, but it's just fodder for thought, and we can maybe get into some questions and think more about what needs to happen in the future. But doing this work, we run into barriers for sure, and are working to overcome those. And that's all I have. I'll stop sharing and then turn it back over to the moderators, and we can move into questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Absolutely wonderful. And let's take a moment before we dive into questions to give our virtual round of applause and gratitude to all the speakers.
Thanks.
So I will field some questions. If you have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat or throw up your virtual raised hand, and I'll call on people who want to speak verbally. And I will kind of round robin questions at y'all because we got a lot of them. So we'll go in reverse order to start. So for Karam, Vincent asks, I would like to join the coalition. How do I do that? And you shared the QR code, and we'll throw the link in the chat, but any other considerations?
Well, we do have so we've got a website. That's probably the best, the clearinghouse for information about the coalition. We have like a calendar and kind of host all of our events there. And a lot of our events are online, like webinars, things like this. So, but that'd be the best way. And then you'll get access to kind of like all the information about what we're doing, project activities, assistance opportunities, things like that. So that I would say check out the website, which I can drop into the chat unless someone else wants to do that for me. I can do it.
Yeah.
Ingrid, let's see. People are very curious about mushrooms. Um, let's start with from the top. Charlotte says, it seems that many fresh shiitake mushroom markets are flooded. Have you seen that? Um, should one think about drying and value added products if growing shiitakes?
Well, it kind of depends on your market. There's a lot of markets where we're still looking for growers. I get a lot of requests for people to say, can you come to my market? And I basically say no, because I don't have the time or the energy to do markets anymore. So it kind of depends on your region or your area. Definitely look into that and see. I don't do farmers markets anymore because it's a huge time constraint for me, and I didn't make a lot at the markets. So I do more direct, and I do love value added. One of the reasons I got into the whole powdering thing is because I had a lot of people at the farmers markets that said, I love mushrooms, but my son hates them, or I love mushrooms, but my husband hates them. And so I'm like, well, if you do a powder, you can add it into your food. You can add it to your spaghetti sauce. You can add it to your soups. You can add it to all sorts of things. I use it for coatings on my salmon. It doesn't have the texture of the mushroom, which is what people, freak out about. But it gives you the nutritional value and the it kind of hides it. So from my perspective, I have a whole huge market niche for powders. So that's why I got into the powders. Plus, when I do direct sales, I do force fruit. If I get 10-pound orders, I'll probably get 15 pounds. If I don't have, in those extra 5 pounds, I will dehydrate and either do caps or powders from those. I usually just powder the stems, because the stems on the log-grown shiitake mushrooms are a lot firmer. So it's like chewing wood, basically. So it's, nobody wants to eat those. So I powder them. So it's definitely it's eat a mushroom and kind of a thing. Eat the cap and then set the stems aside and then throw them in your Vitamix and blend them. Dry them and dehydrate them. So there's a lot of different ways, and that's just for the shiitake. I mean, there's just so many other mushrooms, and the demand for the like lion's mane. Everybody, because of the brain issues and the health issues with lion's mane, I'm getting a huge amount of requests for lion's mane. So there's different mushrooms besides, if you see that, you've got growers that are a glut for shiitake, then think about growing a different mushroom, because there is a demand for other mushrooms.
Absolutely. Very cool. And how do you powder them? Just like a coffee grinder, or?
I use a Vitamix, or a coffee grinder works well too. For small scale, I actually purchased a large scale coffee grinder for doing larger scale. The powders do get airborne a little bit. So, you want to cover it. I usually put a piece of tin foil or a piece of saran wrap and then put the cover on. And then you want to let it rest for a minute or two, because as soon as you take that off, you're going to get a poof of your shiitake into the air. So there's some thoughts as far as I'm actually starting to look at freeze drying my shiitake mushrooms instead of dehydrating them. It's a big energy and time saving, but it does cost more to get a freeze dryer.
Sure, totally.
Yeah,
and you don't want to breathe in the jet fuel dust.
Well, it's just when you're eating a raw agaricus mushroom, which is the button mushroom. So nobody eats that much that it's probably gonna be worrisome, but it is something to think about, that you really need to cook all your mushrooms, and mushrooms should be cooked in a fat, because most of the nutrients are fat soluble.
So thank you for the insight.
butter, onions, and shiitake. Yeah. And then you can
Man,
freeze them too. You can, if you're cooking a lot of mushrooms, bag them up and throw them in your freezer for later use. You don't have to cook them. You just add them to your meals. Because shiitake is really, and dehydrating, they rehydrate phenomenally well. And you can add water, boiling water to it, rehydrate it. And then I use the water for risotto. So nothing goes to waste.
absolutely. Neat. I have a question for Robin. When you talk to your clients initially, do you I assume what you're talking to people who will sell them in stores? Do you talk about price and volume expectations before you jump in and develop your products?
Yeah, that's an important conversation to have. And I would say, back when I had my business, one thing I tried to do because I knew my quality was second to none, and I was a pretty fastidious producer. I made sure that I was not concentrating on price. So I pretty much named my price, and folks were like, yeah, okay. Fortunately, I was dealing with a product area that folks have a hard time getting material for. So I intentionally did not want to set myself up in competition with everybody in the world. So part of my process of selecting my crops was something that nobody else could really produce very well, or not as well as I could. I'd also encourage people to look at their cost of production, the amount of time and effort, travel, all their overhead that goes into producing their crops, rather than what the person down the road is charging. Rather than what some of the big warehouses are charging for medicinal herbs, because you're going to be able to produce a much better product. At least that's the aim. With ASD, when we work with growers, a lot of folks are like, well, how much you paying for this crop? I'm like, well, that's the wrong question to ask. How much do you need for that crop is what I want you to tell me, because for so many years, agricultural production had been geared toward producing to the price point that the market demanded, rather than looking at production cost and what's the living wage for the producer. We've got to get out of that mindset. We have to really focus on what it takes for us to make a living if this type of production is ever going to take off and be profitable and accomplish the economic, community, and environmental benefits that we want it to. Also, just real quick, I happen to notice a question. I don't want to miss this person. Somebody from Texas asked about native plant resources in the state of Texas. I'm going to drop a link to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center at the University of Texas in Austin. That's one that comes to mind as a really good resource in Texas for, if you're involved in production of native plants. So I hope I answered your question about pricing. If not, just drop something in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's important to match, what you need to make a profit, and not just, I don't know, it's not a charity necessarily.
Right.
So a question for all of you. This is from Karen, who says, great presentation. Would it be advisable for farmers or group of farmers to begin nursery production of stock rather than just production of the crop?
Yeah. I'll jump into that. One of the things that I've run into is, even the Savannah Institute, they don't have pawpaw until next year. So 2025. So even, we're running into, even the larger producers, are always running out. Last year, I couldn't get elderberry when I wanted to buy elderberry because I waited too long into the season. You have to go really early and buy them ahead of time and then wait till, for them to be shipped. And so I would say, yes, it's another value added product that you could be growing on your property. Yeah.
Right. And I would say also that a lot of times the production of nursery stock can be the most profitable product in terms of forest farming. Elderberry is a good example. there are a lot of folks promoting elderberry production, but most of the folks that I know that are making money in elderberry production are selling elderberry cuttings and elderberry plants. And if you can, don't overlook the ornamental value of a lot of these forest crops as well. Like, if you can hook into an ornamental market for the production of, black cohosh, Solomon seal, golden seal for folks to plant in their woodland landscapes. I mean, instead of $30, $40, $50 a pound, you're maybe looking at $15, $20 for a rhizome or more, depending on how it's sold and marketed. So don't overlook the ornamental market. Don't overlook the collector market. Don't overlook any market, really. There's a lot of folks out there interested in native medicinal plants.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate that. And honestly, so Karen asked that question, like that was sort of the premise of this whole second SARE grant that we tried to pull off the ground with the NFFC, which is that we've got this shortage of available planting stock. And then you've got growers that are struggling to get, good prices for product in the wholesale market. There's just this huge opportunity to connect those two pieces. I'm thinking about there's a grower in Ohio that we worked with quite a bit at Rural Action, Rick Falumley, who was formerly like an actuary, I think, before he moved into forest farming full time. So he's really good with numbers, and he's growing ginseng, and he does log grown mushrooms. And for one of our events that we hosted, pulled together a presentation where he had done essentially the economics of selling his ginseng wholesale and selling the mushrooms from his inoculated logs versus selling much younger ginseng plants, essentially as planting stock at the farmer's market to other folks that were interested in getting started themselves, and then just selling inoculated logs. So he decreased the time it took to take that product to market. He was able to, and he did a profitability analysis on this and found that he was making more money selling the plants as planting stock, selling the logs that were inoculated rather than the mushrooms. And his perspective was like, you wouldn't want to reorient your entire forest farming business to this approach, but in terms of it being part of a strategy, he was finding it to be really effective. And something I feel pretty strongly about right now, because people ask like, well, but like, won't that, if you're just selling, your plants as planting stock, won't that market saturate at some point? And we are so far from a point where the market is saturated, where everyone can get plants that wants plants, that I feel like for the foreseeable future, it's a really strategic kind of angle to take with the plants that you have and are thinking about selling.
Nice, yeah. In the more specific, go ahead, Ingrid.
Oh, I was just going to mention the logs. Selling the logs. I do a lot of that too, or I include that in, the educational process too, where they help me to inoculate my 50 logs for 2 or 3 hours, and then they get to take a log home. So it's kind of a win-win. They get to educate it on the process, and then they get to take something home that they have to now take care of. And I was going to mention too, one of the things I've been thinking about is, so I have 3,500 trees. There's no way I'm going to tap all those trees for sugar maple syrup. I'm going to be moving into an adopt a tree program where local urban families can a couple trees, tap them, learn the process, take the sap home and boil it at home. And so I don't have to deal with it. So all of these ways that you can include your community and bring them onto your farm and find ways that you do less work and make a profit is really important.
That's very clever. I know I've had like oyster mushroom spores that I inherited from someone in my fridge that I've just been too intimidated to do anything with for about a year now. So Karam and Robin, this might be something you both can answer. In the specificity in a more technical realm, someone asks, can you speak more about the outcome of propagating with seed versus bulbs, specifically for ramps?
Mm-hmm. Karam, you want me to jump on that?
Yeah, you're the expert, Robin. So I say you jump on that. Go for it.
But I have grown ramps both ways. So seed propagation takes a little longer, but you're going to be able to increase your material at quite a bit, an exponentially larger rate than with divisions, because typically ramps will maybe produce one or two offshoots. A mature bulb will produce one or two, so you're like somewhat limited in the amount of planting stock. It's not like a black coash rhizome where you can take a fairly large rhizome, cut it up into 15, 20, 30 pieces and plant each piece, and then 3 to 5 years come back and you've got a mature plant. Ramps are a little more difficult to start vegetatively. It can be done. Seed is so easy. The main thing is not missing the short window that the seed is actually present, because ramps are a little weird in regards to most plants, because the leaves come up in the early spring. Then once the canopy closes in, the leaves kind of senesce and die down and disappear completely. And then like midsummer, you'll have this little white flower cluster shoot up and produce seed. And usually they're ripe, like in my neck of the woods, late August, September, in that time frame. So if you're not paying attention, and we know you want to pay attention, but if you're not paying attention, you can miss those seed. They're also not a real big plant, but if you do your due diligence and mark your bed and or your collection area and go back and collect seed, seed propagation is a really good way to go. I would also say that it's interesting that we have a national audience, and especially probably a large concentration of participants in the Great Lakes region. In Appalachia, there's a huge tradition of harvesting and eating ramps. But I would say there are better parts of the country, like the Great Lakes region, that are probably much better suited for the production of ramps. I mean, you go up to the UP and northern Illinois and a lot of those areas around the lakes, ramps are everywhere. In the southern Appalachians, they're only in a few locations above 3,000 feet, 4,000 feet if you go south enough. So the conditions are much more, the production areas are much more narrow and more specific the farther south you go. I would say that the Great Lakes region has a lot of potential for the production of ramps, even though maybe there's probably not as much glamour and folklore and mythology associated with ramp harvesting in the Great Lakes region compared to Appalachia. So I would love to talk to folks in the Great Lakes region that are interested in producing ramps. So I think someone put my email on here at some point. Y'all get a hold of me if y'all are interested in ramp production. I'd love to hear about y'all's experience in the Great Lakes. Karam, can you add to that?
Well, I'll add that I recently learned that Chicago, that the name Chicago comes from an indigenous word for ramps. That was pretty cool. So yeah, Great Lakes region is, and in the Northeast region, ramps are really huge in the Northeast. And yeah, no, I mean, you pretty much covered it, Robin, but definitely there are trade-offs when you're thinking about this. Is one of the kind of the difficult aspects of forest farming, and especially for folks who are starting kind of from scratch, is that from a sustainability perspective, it's great to start with seed. It doesn't mean that you don't have to remove plant material from an existing location. And a lot of people do get started, either they have plants on their property in the first place, and that's great. But if you don't, if you're going to buy ramp bulbs from somewhere else, like they've been harvested. And so it's kind of this like, seeds represent a net increase in the overall population of these plants. Bulbs have to come from somewhere else. And right now we're just in a tough place with the supply chain where it can be hard to know if the root material that you're getting for these forest botanicals is being sustainably supplied. So, but from a production perspective, I think it's like go for all the above. Do roots and seed, and you can always ask too. You can ask about how the plants are being produced. I think that's just a good question, and learn a little bit about where they're coming from and think about, the sustainability pieces of it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
About, the seed versus, rootstock and things like that is, from the perspective of just, being able to get in there and do a large area and just spread the seed. I like to think of it sort of like, spreading fairy dust, walking through my woods and just spreading it and seeing where it will actually do well, because different soil types or different, microclimates and things like that. And just, if you're not sure of what you have and what your property is like, it's one way to kind of, do a little test plot by spreading it in a lot of different areas. So.
Yeah, and another consideration with ramps too, at least like in Appalachia, where so many have been wild harvested through the years, a lot of folks are only harvesting the leaves and leaving the bulbs in the ground. There's, some folks will say that the Native Americans in the region have always done that. I have no idea if that's true or just, local myth. But, there is a market for the leaves, especially dried leaves. But whatever plant, this is another important area, whatever plant part that you're marketing is, you need to check with your customer to make sure that's what they're looking for. Because, someone's looking for ramps and you come with ramp leaves and not the whole plant, you may both, leave very disappointed. They may be disappointed because you've drawn the wrong plant part, and you're going to be disappointed because you don't get paid for your labor. But all's not lost. If you want to dry those leaves when you get home and create a product like ramp salt or something like that, a lot of folks are doing that. I've seen ramp cornmeal mixes for ramp cornbread. Probably, the sky's the limit. So just food for thought there.
Cool. Absolutely. We'll end. Well, Ingrid, I had a question from Joy who asks, which animals are you growing that provide fiber?
Oh, so I have 3 different varieties of sheep. I've got Icelandic, Finn Rambolays, and I've got Shetlands, which are a heritage breed. And then I also have 3 Pygora goats. They're the littler goats that are for fiber. I also use them for grazing and for induction. So I have a horse and a burro too, and every day I get a bucket of manure, and one of my maple trees gets a ring of manure. So because one of the hard parts is, I have a sandy loam soil, and it's not super rich in nutrients because the trees are so densely planted. So I'm trying to give a little bit more nutrients to my trees and to the ground. So I use it for, but I primarily have the sheep and goats for fiber.
Yeah. Wow. Neat. That's a lot of variety of sheep. Michael asks, what kind of wax do you use for your logs? Paraffin or beeswax? Is there a pro or con?
Yeah, I do not use beeswax because it's very expensive, and the mice like it, and so they'll eat it out really fast. I use the organic cheese wax. It is still certified organic, although the organic certifiers always want to throw it out. But it's does a little bit better than the beeswax, and it's if you have a source of beeswax, use it. But I don't, because it's the mice love it. And
that's an important consideration.
Yeah, you're sealing the hole to keep the sawdust spawn from drying out, to give the mycelium time to get into the wood. So you definitely want to have something that seals that up really well.
I have another question for all 3 of you. Sarah asks, has there been any research or experience about improving the overstory for growing understory crops? They're specifically starting out with a dense single age regrowth forest.
Yeah, I think I did answer a little bit of that question, and I typed in one of the things, no research per se, but when it comes to funding, so I'm not sure what state she's in, but in Wisconsin, we have Wiffle Gap through the DNR, which I actually got $4,000, and then I have to match it with $4,000 to have loggers come in and do pruning, and they actually provided. They have to have a managed forest program so that that you're doing it right. And then NRCS has a lot of programs that they fund through EQIP, EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. for woodland propagation, so timber stand improvements and things like that. And if you also are in what they call managed forest law, which is a tax reduction program, you can get more help with funding and stuff like that for your woodland too. And you don't have to be public. So there's a fallacy that, if you go into these programs, you have to open it up to the public, and you just get a different cost share. It's a little higher rate if you stay private versus public. So there are a lot of programs like that help underwrite your expenses to open up canopies, to get diversity in, and things like that. Underplanting, shrub plantings, and all of those sorts of things. Getting rid of invasive species. There's a lot of money out there for those kinds of things. So that's why I said, in my slide, I said these are all these different programs, and you want to definitely look into them and try to get, a conservation plan on your property and things like that, in order for you to have kind of a vision of where you want to go with your property. And also then how to sort of parcel it off and go, this year I'm going to tackle this issue, next year I'm going to tackle this issue, and get funding for that. So they're not going to want to fund the whole thing all at once, but they'll fund pieces so that it's more manageable for you to pursue.
Yeah, that's a huge piece of the puzzle. Yeah,
I just want to throw in to that as far as opening up the overstory. So I mentioned that I had done some research in a large scale ginseng farm in the Catskills, and what I was specifically doing was going out, and the farm had planted ginseng across over 1,000 acres. It was really interesting operation called American Ginseng Farm. And essentially, I went out and was measuring the size of the plants, counting how many ginseng plants were there, and then comparing that to all these different environmental variables in those sites, one of which was shade. And of all of the different things that I went out and measured, the only thing that had a strong relationship to the number of ginseng plants, how big they were, was the amount of sunlight coming through the canopy. And essentially what we found on this big ginseng farm was that it was overall too shady. And the sunnier the sites, the bigger the ginseng plants were, the more plants had actually germinated and survived. So a lot of the forest botanical plants that we're talking about are shade obligate for the most part. They need some degree of shade. They can't stand sort of full sun conditions. And that's not true for every plant, but for most. But I think because of that, there's this perception that just shade is good. But in reality, these are plants, they need light. And so as just a general rule of thumb, if you have a mature second growth forest with a totally filled in kind of canopy, there's a good chance that a lack of sunlight is slowing down the growth of your forest botanicals. And so individual, they talk about single tree selection, where you harvest one tree here and open up some light in the canopy. The research is suggesting that there's good reason to think that would actually result in your plants growing a little bit faster. But of course, you're always, especially if you're doing like a wild simulated approach where you're trying to be pretty hands off, you want to introduce the plants into the understory of your forest and not have to be out there weeding and doing different things. When you introduce more light into the environment, you might get competition from other plants in the understory. And so finding a balance, it's going to be kind of site specific, but I will just say that in general, yes, if you've got like a really, really shady site, there's a chance that that could be a limiting factor for the growth over the course of 5 years of your understory crops. So it is something to think about.
That's a very important consideration. Totally. All right. I guess we'll wrap it up. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Ingrid, Robin, and Karam. Another virtual round of applause. I will call this the end of the session, and feel free to mingle and slowly trickle out if you want to continue this hallway conversation. Thank you so much, y'all.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Good job.
All right. Should we?
I guess I'll unspotlight y'all. But yeah, thank you so much, y'all. This is
Thank
really
you.
interesting.
Yeah, we had a good
Yeah,
turnout.
this was fun.
This is the most attended session that I've seen other than the opener.
Oh, really? Well, how many
Well,
people?
all right then.
At the peak, it was 165.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And let's see. The first day had 230. Oh, no. The keynote had 264. You didn't beat the keynote.
Well, that would have not bode well for the keynote if we beat.
Well, it was nice. I learned a lot too, just from the other presenters. So we're always learning, we're always expanding. It's nobody has the end all be all for this. We're just all really at that just beginning of that whole incline of knowledge and growth. So thank you. Yeah.
And forest farming is a broad.
It's really cool. No, go ahead, Robin.
Okay, sorry, Karen. I was just going to say, forest farming is a broad topic with lots of different ways to be a practitioner. There's lots of right ways, probably only a few wrong ways. Mostly, you need a forest.
Yeah. Well, and if you have an idea
And some patience.
And if there's not a lot of research on it, apply for a SARE grant, the Sustainable Ag Research and Education, the farmer rancher grants. They're $15,000 to a farmer to do a project, for something that, may or may not have ever been done before. So if you're thinking about something, and go for it, there's a lot of those kinds of things out there.
And I noticed Bob Hayes is still in the call. Bob, if you could hear me, it looks like you had a question in the chat about elderberry cuttings, production, propagation of elderberry. There are, if you just search for elderberry propagation or propagating elderberries, there's more information you can shake a stick at. But the long and short of it is, if you want to take a cutting and at least in my area, late February, with 2 nodes, on a cutting, at least 2 nodes, maybe 3. You want to stick at least that bottom node, keep your cutting pointed up, stick that bottom node in the ground, either in a soilless mix, or you could do it in the ground, or in a glass of water on the windowsill, depending on how, what kind of production scale you're talking about. That bottom node will produce both roots and shoots, and the top node will produce more shoots. So anyway, they're simple to propagate. Hope that helps a little bit.
I'm going to the Colonial Germplasm Repository in Oregon in a month or 2 to collect scion wood, and I'm going to collect as many different kinds of elderberries from there as I can for the breeding program, which will be a lot of fun.
Well, one thing I wanted to comment on was the fact that a lot of these cultivars that are being propagated, there's no information about what soil type or what region or which ones will be the best for your conditions. And so even just keeping data on whatever you plant and sharing that with the group so that other growers can know, oh, this John's something or other elderberry grows great in the Northwest, but it's okay in Ohio or whatever, or
yeah.
Ideas of all these new cultivars that we're seeing. And, there's a lot of research and a lot of data that still needs to be collected on all of those so that we know that, we're planting the best thing. We're not going to be throwing our money away, planting aren't adapted to our region.
Totally. So, we have a elderberry variety trial that's currently being done between us and Missouri, and that will be releasable eventually.
Yeah. Cool. So that's any time that you're planting anything, keep good journal records and share that with the group, because it really is important.
We need some good cultivars for the Southeast because most of the ones that are available don't necessarily perform very well in the Southeast. So there's that. So if you need a research partner, really let us know. We can find some land, help you out.
Oh, thanks. That's valuable. Ingrid, did you want your did you want your slides shared
Oh, yeah.
on the resources list? Because you had a lot of, okay, cool. You had some great ideas of funding people to reach out to.
Yeah, no, feel free. It's the thing for most of us is we get our information from I like the fact that Paul Stamets says we're standing on the shoulders of other giants. And then, and basically, our stuff, my stuff isn't proprietary. I'm happy to share.
Lily, I just posted it in there. So
Heck yeah.
So
Erin's been the main accumulator of all the questions.
I was just oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm so tired.
You guys are doing a great job. This has been awesome so far, but it's a lot. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed.
There's so many mushroom questions we weren't able to get to.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But your emails are on there, so hopefully they'll reach out directly and if they really want to know those answers.
Yeah, they can email me. That's fine. Or whatever. Yeah, it's amazing.
I'll say that
many people
go ahead.
Well,
I think it's really cool that, it's cool how many people at this conference are like kind of like Western US, and it seems like there's a lot of interest in like forest farming from people in the West. And I don't have a lot of personal experience with that. It seems like mushrooms are like a big one that people can kind of just like jump into. But at one of the talks yesterday, it was agroforestry in the Pacific Northwest. Somebody was talking about trying to do like, they had like a hillside. It was all, I think must have been big leaf maple. And they wanted to do the understory botanicals. They wanted to do like try ramps and golden seal. And it's interesting. It seems like people are trying it. So it's something I'd love to learn more about.
Yeah. I'm living in the Pacific Northwest for a few more months before I moved back to Madison. And so during this time, I'm touring as many Pacific Northwest agroforestry people as I can. I've done about 10 tours so far, but there's some people highlighted that I had not seen yet. So that's exciting.
That's awesome. Well, if you can learn anything about forest farming and what people are doing and then report back, that would be awesome.
Exactly.
One of the things I was going to mention too, you mentioned you had oysters in your refrigerator, that you had hesitated to plant them. There's been some research recently that the oyster mushroom is starting to colonize or naturalize in the environment and becoming an invasive. And a woman in Madison who did a research project said that in the trees that had the oyster mushroom, the species diversity of the mycelium went from 80 different mycelium to 2.
Wow.
So it has some really negative impacts. So even just, from the standpoint of me as a grower, being responsible and thinking about how we're impacting, like shiitake hasn't colonized or naturalized, but you have to think about the fact that we're bringing species in from other countries and how this is. But golden oyster is so aggressive. It's why it's been used in remediation, because when you take an oyster mushroom and put it in with the filters of smoked cigarettes, it won't eat or it won't break down that nicotine. But analyzes there's nothing to eat, it will actually adapt and will start breaking down the nicotine filters. So it is incredibly adaptive. So it's just interesting stuff. Mushrooms, mycelium are so fascinating.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah.
I always tell young people, if you want to go into a field that has unlimited opportunities for research and education and either engineering or whatever, go into myco stuff. It's just amazing. So anyway, I
out there, we have a hard stop at 11:45 because the next group is coming in. So
I was going to say I got to run.
Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks again. That was fun.
Bye.
Bye.